That first day was worrisome. Things only got worse from there. I remember the curious sight as I woke from my sleep. Merida was still in bed, still sleeping. In over 500 years since we'd been married in Thedas, she had never slept in longer than me. By the time I woke, she would already have started on her morning routine of getting her hair combed and braided, while handmaids prepared her clothes and jewelry for the day. The living quarters in the castle would be a bustle of activity, with breakfast being set out. Petitions that would need to be addressed in court prepared for her to read before going to the throne room, and fires being tended to. I turned and cupped a hand to her cheek. She wasn't especially warm or cold, and her breathing was perfectly normal. While it wasn't completely out of the realm of possibility, I had to assume that perhaps the prior day's activities had an especially stressful day and she simply needed the rest. It wouldn't be the first time she'd canceled court to spend the day doing something else. Occasionally, she felt like waking the streets of Orzammar to socialize with the people, visit shops, enjoy food at different stalls, and generally get a pulse on the populace. It took me a few moments to realize that Prifa, her lady-in-waiting, was simply standing a few feet off to the side. Her expression was a mixture of confusion and concern. She saw that I had noticed her, and her voice came out in a whisper. "Forgive me, but I've tried waking her several times. She hasn't stirred. Not once. She doesn't seem to notice anything." I sat up and grabbed my robe, wrapping it around myself as I walked around to Merida's side of the bed. "You called to her?" "Shook her." "I did all I dared, my lord." Prifa nodded as she hugged Merida's dressing gown to her chest. "I admit that I shook her firmly and called to her for some time now. She hasn't shown a single sign of waking. She doesn't turn or move away from my stirrings." I grabbed Merida by the shoulders and shook her, gently, as first, then firmer, and with more force over the course of a minute. I called her name, then shouted it. Just as Prifa had said, she didn't react at all. "Fetch a healer!" I barked at Prifa, who nodded and sprinted out of the room. Prifa was a mother hen when it came to Merida, caring over every little detail of her day-to-day life, as if the world would crumble if Merida encountered a single inconvenience. She would be sure to find one of the royal healers quickly enough. With Prifa's sudden departure, Darntir, my valet, poked his head into our bedchamber. "My lord, is everything all right?" "The Empress hasn't come out yet, and Prifa..." I silenced him with a wave of my hand. "Send for the honor guard. Have them stationed outside of our chambers. But be sure not to raise too much an alarm. Say only that the Empress wishes to delay today's court until tomorrow." "At once, my lord," Darntir replied quickly and set off to relay the command. The court had assumed that Merida and I would eventually emerge from our chambers to pass through the Diamond Quarter and make our way down to the trade district. Whenever court was cancelled, this was typically what would happen. We took advantage of this to keep word of Merida's state quiet for the moment. One healer arrived, then another, then another. Within the hour, every healer the castle trusted to tend to the royal family was standing in the bedchamber, discussing the possibilities. A coma was the most widely accepted explanation for what was happening to her. However, no one could figure out the cause. She was in perfect health and had been ever since she was crowned. Her skin was pink and perfect, her blood pressure no different from someone sleeping soundly, and her eyes reacted normally to stimulation. There seemed to be some sort of disconnect from her and the waking world. It was this thought that had us bring in Terran, her personal bodyguard within the honor guard. Terran was instructed to activate his lyrium well gauntlet. He shifted through various spectrums of the Fade to see if he could find Merida nearby. When that failed, a citywide exercise of the system was announced. This wasn't out of the ordinary. The system was tested regularly to ensure the proper function of the devices. While this exercise wasn't on the normal schedule, it wasn't questioned much. However, Keen observers noticed that Merida had not made an appearance yet, and that the local defenses had been mobilized into a system exercise which sent them through every corner of the city. I knew about Merida's Pantheon ability, so I assumed that she perhaps was spending time in the Fade. Sending the city's defenders through the city while in different spectrums of the Fade might allow them to happen upon her. This was a desperate long shot, but it was the only other thing I could think of at the time. The day had dragged on, and she hadn't so much as shifted in her sleep. Noise didn't reach her. Probing healers didn't bother her. Nothing did. She wasn't even fazed when I began to panic and yelled in desperation. It was the first day in over half of a millennia she hadn't left our chambers to serve her people, and her people had taken notice. The next day, things escalated. Nobles and other courtiers began insisting on knowing what was going on. This wasn't my strong point. I had watched Merida schmooze the nobility and the common folk for centuries. She had a natural charisma that I simply never did. I was certain there was a better way to make the announcement than the way I had decided to do it. But that's just how things went. I didn't want to leave her side, but the people needed to see at least one of us. Or so the nobles insisted. I made the announcement from the balcony of the Diamond District, explaining how the Empress had gone to bed normally the night before last, hadn't woken the day before, and was still sleeping even now. I made sure to explain that she didn't seem like she was in pain, that she seemed to be sleeping peacefully. And while she didn't stir to our attempts to wake her, she didn't seem like she was in any way in danger. The public's reaction to the news was mixed. Some were grateful that she seemed all right. Others were terrified that without her guidance, the nobility would slip back into the cutthroat politics that were rampant before she had taken power. There was also understandable concern that without her reformist nature, the fluidity of the caste system, which had essentially become more of a way to understand a person's general profession, might become the rigid structure it had been before she was born. To the great shame of our people, there were a few who saw this as a good thing. They believed that Merida having power for so long had stagnated our people. They were clueless contrarians who had never lived a second under the original caste system. Merida had spent centuries constantly working tirelessly to ensure the dwarven society had constantly progressed forward. Nobles only had their titles because of tradition. Courtiers were anything from common folk to business owners, with the term only being used as a traditional catch-all. Society, technology, education. Every part of the empire had moved forward by leaps and bounds. Crime was almost non-existent thanks to the social programs she had helped put into place so that no one in the empire needed to suffer. Still, those who saw this as a positive suggested that her influence had steered the dwarves in an unnatural direction. They ignored all the good that had come from the empire and focused on arbitrary details. One of the biggest things they would point out that the lyrium shares each dwarf was owed at the end of each year had stopped coming in, because over the centuries, social programs were instituted that drew from the pool that the shares came from. While others would point out that the lyrium shares paying for social programs still stopped taxes from drawing more from the pockets of the populace, the naysayers would counter by saying that no longer receiving those shares was the same thing. They hoped that new dwarves would come into power with fresh ideas and a new perspective. Surprisingly, however, no one actually panicked. Days, weeks, months passed without her active in the world. But the dwarves seemed fine. While I helped to organize a new form of governance to manage the empire till Merida woke up, a sense of calm washed through the collective. It was as if in a time when her people needed to be truly reassured that things would be all right. Merida's presence touched all of us. She had been called the Mother of Dwarves, and it was that motherly presence that we all began to feel. Safe and secure, as if one's mother was nearby and watching over you. Mages from all over the world came in to try and help. They tried spells, searching the Fade, and any number of remedy attempts. Nothing worked, but people were starting to worry less as time went on. Dwarves felt her presence, and that seemed enough to keep the peace and keep confidence in the Empire. Our anniversary, which was also the anniversary of the Empire, came and went. With it came a lament that there wasn't the annual address she would give. Dwarves thrive on tradition, and this had been a staple for over 500 years now. A movement started to prepare for the next year so that something could be done to honor her. To my surprise, the whole of the Empire got behind the effort. It was asked that I stay ignorant of the details, since the people wanted it to be a surprise for me, as well as an honor for her. A few days before the next anniversary, the request to move Merida from our chambers came. To say the least, I wasn't exactly thrilled with the idea. I relented, but I was extremely nervous. Felt wrong to be away from her, especially when she was still in such a vulnerable state. On the day of the anniversary, I was led to the Ostagar Memorial. To my surprise, Orzammar was packed to capacity, with only just enough room for the guards, myself, and a line of dignitaries. Nobles and others were able to walk through in single file. The dwarves watching the procession looked happy and hopeful, curious and eager. I noticed that there were scrying mirrors placed regularly along the city's streets and grew intrigued. The procession made its way into the Ostagar Memorial, and I found a new dais had been raised at the back. As we climbed the steps up the dais, I froze in place. Standing at the top of the dais, dressed in her favorite gambeson gown, was Merida. I stared at her in disbelief until a sense of disbelief began to creep into me. That wasn't Merida. She looked similar. So much so that she could have been Merida's twin, if not for just a few minor details that were off, which very few people would have been able to notice. Then I noticed behind her was Merida, resting in a large bed that was enclosed in glass. What's going on? What is this? I asked as I approached the impersonator. The faux Merida curtsied perfectly, just the way Merida would have. Lord Oradum, it's an honor to have been chosen for this event. I hope I look the part. You're the spitting image of her, I replied as I looked from her to Merida. She smiled up at me. There was a difference there. She looked like Merida, but she wasn't an impersonator. When Merida smiled, she smiled wide and loudly, offering all the energy in her heart in the gesture. This smile was polite. That's likely because I'm related to the two of you, she replied. I'm one of the 21st generation from your line. If you're wondering, that means I'm your granddaughter, with 19 greats before the word granddaughter. And if you're curious, that makes me one of about 3 million of my generation. Give or take. I stared at her in disbelief. Our bloodline had been a source of pride and carefully watched for some time. That much I was aware of. After 5 centuries, I hadn't really considered it much. Apparently, though, the practice of keeping up with the Daldindin band not wavered, but had become increasingly complex. If what she said was true, it meant that her generation, as well as their parents and grandparents, would put our living grandchildren close to 5 or 6 million. The ceremony for the anniversary was simplistic for the most part. Speeches were given. Mages helped to send the image of the ceremony to the crying mirrors posted around the city. The look-alike retold Merida's story in a more condensed form. This was the new tradition for the anniversary of the Empire. Over the years, the story was given in more detail. Dwarves would visit from all over the Empire. Smaller traditions were added on, like the offering of coins, which would be used for social services. The lookalikes became impersonators, who learned to mimic her expressions, voice, and the smallest nuances of her personality and movements, to the point that even I had trouble telling them apart. One thing I couldn't stand, however, was being away from Merida. A new set of chambers were prepared for me behind the dais. Over time, I stopped participating in governing of the Empire in Merida's stead, leaving it to others. She was asleep, but she was still guiding us through her will. We somehow understood her approval or disapproval in our souls. She was a part of us, linked to us on a fundamental level. But where every other dwarf could live normally without being beside her, I could not. I needed to be with her. Occasionally, she would talk in her sleep. Even more rarely, she would wake for a time. Moments, minutes, hours, even months at one point. Dwarves celebrated her return. I lived for those moments. With each awakening, she assured me that she would be coming home to me. She was leaning more, gaining the ability to steer herself back. Understanding was coming little by little. Where I was stuck in Thedas, waiting through the millennia for that fateful day, she was being pulled from one universe to another, doing her best to live through them so she could get back to me. We were each other's goals. Through time, space, and existence, we waited. Death had separated us once, and we had found each other again. What was time compared to that? So I wait. I keep faith. I guard her until her eyes open once more and she is back with me again. The dwarves had developed spaceflight and space travel. We had begun to explore our solar system. And beyond. We'd met other sentient life and had begun trading with them. The Empire had grown beyond Thedas, and I could only hope that Merida would take soon to see it. She would be so surprised and so proud of our children. I was speaking with a classroom of young dwarves who had come to see the memorial and to see Merida. It wasn't uncommon for schools to schedule such trips, so it had become part of my routine to speak with them. Just as I had finished my small speech about the importance of the memorial, traditions in dwarven life, and why we guard Merida while she sleeps, a thunderous quake shook the ground around us. Alarms which hadn't sounded since their installation wailed to life around the city. Guards around the memorial immediately began moving to safeguard the civilians and the children. As part of the security response to an attack on Orzammar, securing Merida was the highest priority. A hologram of one of the city guard commanders popped up. Lord Oradum! A gigantic vessel has breached the defenses and landed at the base of the mountains. Origin unknown. Make and model do not come up in any registrars. Hostile enemy forces are being teleported onto the surface. We have mobilized the army and air force. City defenses are on full alert. We have an extraction team rushing to the memorial to escort the Empress and yourself to safety. Understood, I replied as I helped the teacher get her class under control. We have school children here. We'll need them to be taken to somewhere safe. There is nowhere safer, Merida's voice said groggily, than by their mother's side. I turned, joy and relief flooding through me as Merida stood from her rest, her eyes fixated on the children. Her smile was reassuring and warm. Come, children. We will keep you safe. She looked at me with love and confidence. I'm home, my love. For good. Let's protect our children. Words cannot express how happy I was. I stepped forward and took her hand, helping her to step out of the resting chamber, grinning happily to have her back. Whatever you say, my love.